So close, yet so far. I've always argued that I prefer my favorite football team to be bad and well out of contention than to be right on the edge of championship glory but never being able to achieve it. Today, we're going to be looking at teams who were good enough over a 5-year period to win at least a single Super Bowl, but failed to do so. We'll be ranking this top 10 according to the team's cumulative C-score over that period of time. As always, a deeper explanation of C-score can be found in the description of this video down below. As with our other multiple year rankings, there will be no overlap of seasons by these teams. There won't be a 49ers listing from 1980 to 84 and one from 82 to 86, for example, never minding that they won Super Bowls during this period. Without further ado, let's get on with the top 10. We're going to start off at number 10 with the Buffalo Bills, but probably not the Bills you think. This is the current incarnation of the Bills from 2019 to 2023. Their cumulative C-score for this period was 97.404, and we can see here wrapping around that score are their year-by-year totals. In 2019, the Bills made it to the playoffs for only the second time in 20 seasons, but they lost in overtime against the Houston Texans. In 2020, they did a lot more than simply make the playoffs. They won their division, jumping up to a 13-3 record. They made it to the AFC title game, where they fell in Kansas City to the Chiefs. They were only 11-6 in 2021, but they greatly outplayed that record. But they met up with the Chiefs again, this time in the divisional round, where they lost in a highly dramatic fashion. They were back to 13 wins in 2022, and they seemed like they were on their way, but they were facing the Cincinnati Bengals at home in the divisional round, where they took a very bad loss. In 2023, they made it to the divisional round for the 4th consecutive season, but for the 3rd consecutive season could get no further, where they once again lost to the Chiefs, this time at home. During this time period, the Bills went 58-24, scoring nearly 27 points per game, allowing 18.5. They never even made it to the Super Bowl, making it to the AFC title game only once. Their C-score in 2019 wasn't very strong, so if they do better than that this season and again fail to win the Super Bowl, this entry is going to be replaced by the 2020 to the 2024 Buffalo Bills. Coming in at number 9 are the division rivals of the Buffalo Bills. We're talking about the Miami Dolphins between 1981 and 1985. They become our first team to clear a triple-digit C-score during the period in question, barely getting over 100 at 100.879. The 81 Dolphins were certainly memorable. They went 11-4-1 during the regular season, but they lost the epic in Miami in overtime to the Chargers once the playoffs came around. They went 7-2 when the strike shortened 1982, where they did win 3 playoff games and made it to the Super Bowl, where they led in the 4th quarter before ultimately losing to the Redskins. They drafted Dan Marino in 1983, going 12-4 and getting to host in the divisional round of the playoffs, where they lost to the Seattle Seahawks. The Dolphins were an explosive, record-breaking 14-2 in 1984. They simply ran into a higher level of greatness in Super Bowl 19, losing to the San Francisco 49ers. 1985 was meant to be the bounce-back season. They were 12-4. They gave the Chicago Bears their only loss the entire season, except that they fell at home in the AFC title game to the New England Patriots. Miami compiled a 56-16-1 record during this era, scoring over 25.5 points per game, allowing fewer than 17.5. They did manage to make it to 2 Super Bowls, but they couldn't quite close the deal, and to date have yet to make it back. We'll stay with the AFC for our number 8 entry, but we'll be moving back to the 21st century, looking here at the San Diego Chargers from 2004 through 2008. They cleared 20 points of C-score in 4 out of these 5 seasons, and their combined C-score went over 101.586 to be exact. The Chargers broke out of their franchise doldrums in 2004, going 12-4, but they took an unfortunate loss at home in the wildcard round to the New York Jets. They may have only gone 9-7 in 2005, but we've shown that they were indeed the best 9-7 team in NFL history. They did, however, miss the playoffs. In 2006, they roared out to a 14-2 record, held the #1 seed in the AFC, but they chargered, and they lost at home in the divisional round to the New England Patriots. That brought in a new head coach, Norv Turner, for the 2007 season. They dropped to an 11-5 record, but they got to the AFC title game. They were unable to break through against those same Patriots. In 2008, they were a 4-8 team before winning their last 4 and getting the division title. They actually did win a playoff game before falling to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They won more than 2/3 of their game in this era, going 54-26, putting up more than 27.5 and allowing fewer than 19.5 points per game. They never did make it to the Super Bowl though, only getting to the AFC title game once. Classic San Diego Charger underachieving. Let's get our first taste of an NFC team at number 7 with the Dallas Cowboys from 1978 to 1982. We see a jump here in the C-score. They got up to 108.305, clearing 20 points in 4 out of the 5 seasons. They entered the 1978 season as defending Super Bowl champions, were 12-4, and made it back to the Super Bowl, where they lost to their arch-rival Pittsburgh Steelers. In 79, they were 11-5, but saw an overall downturn, and they lost at home in the divisional round to the LA Rams. They were better in 1980 at 12-4, but had to settle for the wild card. They made it to the NFC Championship game, where they lost to the team that put them in the wild card in the first place, the Philadelphia Eagles. They came back with a 12-4 record in 1981, this time winning the division, but they were victims of the catch, losing the NFC title game to the San Francisco 49ers. In the shortened 1982 season, they went 6-3, finishing behind the Redskins in the division, where they then lost to the Redskins in the NFC title game. Dallas went 53-20 during this period, over 24.5 points scored, just over 17 points per game allowed. They did make it to the Super Bowl the one time, and then they lost in the NFC title game for 3 straight seasons. This all would eventually lead to a downturn in the late 80s. We're going back a ways for our number 6 entry. These are the Los Angeles Rams between 1967 and 1971. They cleared at least 15 points in C-score for each of these seasons. Their total C-score just missed, hitting 111. They got 110.985. The Rams were probably the single best team in the NFL in 1967, going 11-1-2, but the rotational system in the playoffs meant they had to go to Green Bay, where they lost. They had the great misfortune of being in the same division as the Baltimore Colts in 1968, and despite going 10-3-1, there was no wild card and they missed the playoffs. They did make the playoffs in 1969, going 11-3, but they faced up with the powerhouse Vikings in the divisional round, where they took another loss. They came back after the merger in 1970, going 9-4-1, but that tie cost them in the newly introduced wild card. The Lions made the playoffs, the Rams did not. In almost a deja vu in 1971, they went 8-5-1, but that tie cost them the division to the 49ers, who made the playoffs as the Rams did not. The Rams went 49-16-5 during this era, scoring nearly 24 points a game, allowing fewer than 16. They did advance to what was then the NFL title game in 1967, but unbelievably, they missed the playoffs during this span 3 separate times. We've reached the halfway point, and we're going to be going back as far as we possibly can to the beginning of the Super Bowl era in a franchise we've already seen, the Dallas Cowboys from 1966 to 1970. Every season over 13 in C-score, including one over 25 and another one almost hitting 35. Combined total here, 111.32. The Cowboys were coming into their own in 1966. They went 10-3-1, but they had to face the juggernaut Packers in the NFL title game, and even though they were at home, they couldn't get that victory. They dropped down some in 1967, going 9-5, but they made it back to the NFL title game once again against the Packers, this time in Green Bay, where they lost in the famous Ice Bowl. At 12-2 in 1968, they were primed and ready, but they had to go to Cleveland in the playoffs, where they lost in the divisional round. At 11-2-1 in 1969, the playoff rotational system was back in their favor. They got the Browns at home, but still lost. In 1970, they went 10-4 and finally broke through to the Super Bowl, only to lose to the Colts in what is now known as the Blunder Bowl. Dallas went 52-16-2 during this era, scoring nearly 27 points per game, a very high number for the era, allowing just over 16 per game. They did make it to one Super Bowl. They were on the edge of two more, but the next season in 1971 is when they got their ring. At number 4, we have a parallel entry to number 6, not just because they're from the exact same time period, but because it's two teams from the same state. We're talking about the Oakland Raiders from 1967 to 1971, and no question about it, this era was built on those first 3 seasons. Their combined C-score got just past 115 total. The Raiders had come to dominate the late-stage AFL, and in 1967 at 13-1, they were clearly the AFL's best team. However, they couldn't win Super Bowl II against the mystique of the Green Bay Packers. They were 12-2 in 1968, but had to play an extra game as a divisional tiebreaker. After winning that, they couldn't go cross-country and beat the Jets in the AFL title game. They were back in 1969 with a new head coach in John Madden. They won the division at 12-1-1, but the AFL allowed so-called wildcard teams to make it to the playoffs that season. That team in the West was the Chiefs, and the Raiders fell to them in the final AFL title game. The first season after the merger in 1970 saw them go 8-4-2 and were on the edge of the Super Bowl for the 3rd straight season, this time losing the first AFC Championship game to the Baltimore Colts. And in 1971, they somehow again went exactly 8-4-2. This was their only non-division title in a 12-year period. The Raiders put up a stellar record during this period, going 53-12-5, scoring over 27.5 points per game, allowing fewer than 18.5. They just simply blew lots and lots of opportunities. Heading down the home stretch at number 3, we get our second repeat appearance by a franchise, the LA Rams from 1973 to 1977. As it turns out, they just simply took off 1972 because every season except that season from 67 to 77 has shown up on this list. Their total C-score was pushing 123 at 122.923. The Rams were awesome in 1973, going 12-2, but the rotation system put them on the road in Dallas in the playoffs, where they lost in the divisional round. The rotation system got them again in 1974 after a 10-4 season. They were put in Minnesota, where they lost in the NFC Championship game. Behind a dominant defense in 75, they went 12-2. This time they got to host the title game against the wildcard Cowboys, where they lost again. They avenged the Cowboys in the 76 playoffs after a 10-3-1 regular season, but they had the Vikings again in the NFC title game, where they again lost. Another double-digit win total followed in 1977 at 10-4. They got to host the Vikings in the playoffs, where they lost in a game known as the Mud Bowl that we've covered before. In total, the Rams went 54-15-1, scoring just over 23 points per game, allowing fewer than 12. They won the division every year, but they lost in the NFC title game for 3 straight seasons. All of this did lead to head coach Chuck Knox losing his job. It's silver medal time. At number 2 are the Minnesota Vikings from 1969 through 1973. We've certainly covered this team before. Adding on the 72 and 73 season, we see their combined C-score for this period was 137.37. The 1969 Vikings were an absolute powerhouse, going 12-2, winning the last NFL title before the merger, but they went to Super Bowl IV and lost to the Chiefs. Again at 12-2, they were a slightly less powerful powerhouse in 1970. This time they lost in the divisional round at home to the 49ers. They went 11-3 in 1971, but they once again lost at home in the divisional round, this time to the Cowboys. Now in 1972, they were a 7-7 team. They were better than that record indicated, but at 7-7, clearly they did not make the playoffs. They had their bounce back in 1973, once again going 12-2 and this time getting to the Super Bowl. The Miami Dolphins were in their way though, and they were simply way too tough for them. Minnesota was 54-16 during this time, scoring over 22 points per game, allowing fewer than 12. They bookended this 5-year period with Super Bowl appearances, and they won again in 74 and 76, where they lost there again, and they have not been back to the big game since. We've made it to the number 1 spot, and it wasn't really close. These are the 2006 through 2010 New England Patriots, pushing up against 150 total points in C-score, 149.355 to be exact. The Pats went 12-4 in 2006, where they made it to the AFC title game and had a 21-3 lead over the Indianapolis Colts before blowing it. We all know this 2007 season by now. They went 16-0, they made it to the Super Bowl, where they lost to the Giants. They were unlucky in 2008. They were 11-5 and are the only team to ever win 11 games since playoff expansion in 1990 to miss the playoffs. They dropped to 10-6 in 2009, but that was good enough to win the division and get back to the playoffs, where they got ravaged at home by the Baltimore Ravens. And in 2010, they went 14-2 and were back to their powerhouse form. But once they got to the playoffs, they failed in the divisional round at home against the New York Jets. Against a mostly weak division, the Patriots went a staggering 63-17 during this era, averaging over 29 points per game and allowing fewer than 18. They averaged almost 13 wins a season, but they only once made the Super Bowl where they couldn't get it done. That's not great. Looking at the top 10 at a glance, we can see a gradual move up the charts from spots 10 through 4, with a decent sized jump between numbers 8 and 7. But the big leaps start with the top 3. Almost 8 points between the Raiders and the Rams. Almost 15 points between the Rams and the Vikings. Then another 12 points from the Vikings and the Patriots, leaving the Patriots nearly 52 points ahead of the Bills at number 10. Thank you so much for making it this far into the video. If you liked it, give it a like, and don't be shy about sharing it with as many people as you can. Please subscribe to the channel and ding that bell for all future notifications while you're at it. What did you think about all of this? Is there another team whose 5-year run without a Super Bowl deserved to be on this list? I'm sure the Buffalo Bills of the early 1990s will get plenty of mentions. If only they didn't play in a very weak conference during that time, they may have done so. Any and all thoughts are welcome all the time. Thank you so much again for watching, and until next time, I hope you have an awesome day.